Hello and welcome to our next episode of the Non-League Network podcast. This time we have got David Leese, who is my co-presenter and he's there for a little bit of variety really, because otherwise it's just not Southern accents. And we've got a guest who's come all the way from Wales, who is Tristan. Don't hold it against him. He is here from YEM, and he does a nice little YEM sign whenever you need him to. He's copied it. So welcome, Tristan. Welcome, David.
Oh, good.
Well, thank you.
How's that for an intro? You probably never had one of those before.
No, it was not bad. It was okay.
He's a YMCA. So, listen, you're someone I've been following for a little while. I've seen that you've had a little bit of glory recently. We're going to the French embassy. I want to know all about that. How you got there, and if you'll send us an autograph. What you're up to, what you're doing in life, but generally for a non-league audience, who the hell are you, and what's your background? What are you doing?
Yeah, that's always the best question. I actually have that in my intro to clubs: is who the hell am I and what am I doing here? And so obviously you've given me a bit of an intro, and my name in particular. So I've set up a company called YEM Player Care, which is a solution for non-league clubs, lower league clubs. Could well be any club, but the fact of the matter is it was created for the non-league system, and it's a solution for clubs who want to provide formal player care, not just a one-off situation, not a unique or dynamic situation. It's dual approach. It could be mindset coaching, or it could be well-being support, mental health care, and that a club could choose a tiered option. So it's different budgets, different expectations, different. You could tailor it in different ways to whatever the club wanted it to be. But they can then onboard me as effectively a part-time member of staff, and I would be there as their player care. So they don't have to spend on a full-time player care model, but they can still provide support for the person beyond the player, provide well-being care. It could be provide a safe space. The reason I can do that is I've been very lucky in the past, and I spent a decade in senior leadership and education, done trauma-informed training, different elements of how I can approach mental health care, mixed in with a very important one, which was lived experience. And when I say back when I was 28, because it is 7 years ago now, I had a really difficult moment, traumatic, and I was suicidal, and from there had different types of support and therapy, and I was able to identify really strategic ways for me to move forward. One of them was practical strategies, and so that's what YEM is built to provide. So if the club invests in the player care, what they get in return is whoever I see, whoever is the client at that time, gets a huge bank of practical strategies that they could fit into their routine.
Wow.
I don't know if I got it then.
I mean, literally, I just waited, and I sat there and just went off. This is the podcast, so we're meant to be talking, but where am I meant to start? Like, listen, it's going to be, some of this is going to be a serious, really, really hard hitting topic. That's why I'm cracking at the odd joke here and there. David and I both had moments in our lives where we have questions certain elements of it, and we go through ups and downs, but problem is, you could simplify it in saying we're lads, we don't chat, and in some cases that's really is a situation. And for someone to say I struggled with mental health and I considered what I was going to do, I'll be honest with you, not many blokes do that. I've had mental health problems. I've had situations where I've really struggled with it. I became a widower about 14 years ago. So I had 13 years. I went through it, big time myself. No way was I ever going to talk to my mates about it. No way in football was I ever going to be looking at that. So you've used past and lived experience to then build something that you're helping other people with. And I could imagine that has its own challenges for you, and specific to like non-league. What can you how can you relate that to non-league element to it?
Yeah. And so what I would come in on there is, I think the word isn't controversial, but I would say I have a unique approach to how I see men's mental health, right? I just believe, and it's only through my own experience and my own opinion, it doesn't have to be something that, like a cancel culture type of thing. But I genuinely believe men's mental health is, we've opened the door to men's mental health, but we haven't done it properly, right? We haven't, there are still so much provision within men's mental health we're just not using. It speaks 1,000 words. So it's not for your average male. We talk about there, you touched upon, we wouldn't talk with our friends. One of the things that I work relentlessly hard on with players is articulation, right? And so if we were together now in any type of average setting, whether it's football related, we were at work, we were at a cafe, we were at a pub, the way we articulate how we feel is bare minimum, right? I can guarantee you in the conversations you've had with your mates is, how are you? It's actually, the initial question is pretty informal, so it doesn't actually lend a formal response. It's not like I'm genuinely asking how you are, and then what I get in return is fine, not bad, good, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Well, good could be brilliant, excited, content. It could be so many different connotations. Bad equally could be depressed, anxious, nervous. There's so many different elements of that. In contrast, and not every female, but in contrast, if you had a conversation with a group of females, or you were fly on the wall, the way they articulate is amazing, right? Yeah. And it's not always the environment we want to be in as men, but they do. They talk about their work, they talk about their relationships, they talk about their children, they talk about different types of relationship in life. The way that they can convey how they are in their life and where they are in the moment is far better for us. So the message we deliver is speak up, speak up. The problem is they don't know how, right? Yeah. If I was going to speak up to you, I have to have the articulation and the emotional intelligence to tell you how I feel. Otherwise, I don't know what I'm saying.
Yeah, definitely. I've always said I've got quite a close set of probably 10 mates that we've known each other since we were 6, 7, and played football with a lot of them since that age. And even how close we are and how much like experience we have together, I've always said, since like suffering with my mental health the last 5 years or so, is I wouldn't go to them. It's weird because it's like you don't want to let your guard down or feel weak or whatever in front of your closest mates. You don't want to show them problems. And what I found is the person I confided in the most when I was suffering at that time was a neighbour opposite me, who I'm really good friends with. He's like a 60-year-old West Ham mad fan, and we just got on through football. And he's the one who I opened up to because he suffered with like alcohol problems and mental health like back in his day, and it was just weird how it come about. And I spoke to him rather than like my best mate.
But I think I could wager what that is. And so there's a term I use within young player care, and it's called tidy social and emotional spaces. And I think it's very important for men in general. I can't speak on behalf of women because I've not had that experience in that world, but I've had lots of experience with men and mental health. Is tidy social and emotional spaces. And what I mean by that is your friends are a tidy space for you. You know that if you know, quote unquote, shit hit the fan, that you could talk to them, but you don't want to muddy the waters in that sense. You feel that you're fine enough that you don't want to broach that subject with them. Yeah. Equally with your partner, could be the most supportive, loving person in the world. My wife is like, she's really empathetic. She's really great at that type of thing. But I know that when I tell her I'm in a really difficult place, low place, that I know there's no way to avoid I'm dealing an emotional blow for her. She's going to feel what I feel. And so I try and ride it out as far as I can, because I'm like, I don't want her to really worry about it. Same with parents, same with other people. So if you have someone like you've identified this person in particular, that's what that relationship was built on. So you're not really it's a tidy space for you mentally, that you know this person, we talk well-being. It's an opportunity for me to vent. It's an opportunity for me to share.
Yeah.
And it means I can keep the other relationships in my life neat and tidy like I want them.
Yeah, that
That's,
makes sense.
I mean, you're making so much sense, and also you're going through like the, are you okay? Yeah, not really. Actually, I'm not doing well. Pretty shit. That's kind of the. I think Jamie and Ted Lasso. There's a scene where he does literally that, and he goes from, yeah, I'm fine. Okay, no, pretty sure. Actually, I'm not well. And it's that sort of. There's only 4 levels, and I find, it's my experience. The people I grew up with, they're not even in this bloody country. I grew up in a completely different country. So my mates are people that I don't ever see. I see them once every so often. So my mates are the people that I used to work with. Well, I've moved jobs. People I used to play football with. Actually, that's the people I have one of the closest relationships with, which is really weird. A couple of them have passed away recently, and one of them really, really hit me hard because it was someone that was a teammate. And to me, it was that neat kind of like you're describing it. It's quite tidy. But with him, I knew that it was more than just being mates on a pitch. It was I could actually communicate with him about how are you really feeling. And I might be a bit of an exception in that, I kind of try and explain it a bit more. But I'm struggling to find the words even now, and I'm the bloody host of a podcast. So that's the kind of situation where you go, well, he talks about everything all the time. But when you start talking about these elements of mental health, it's not that easy. So how are you doing it? Kind of, you're working with a club. I imagine if you're a player, right, put yourself in I mean, you do this all the time, but you're a player, you're on a team, you've got mental health issues, you've got your concerns, you've got your real stresses outside of their non-league side. You're not professional, so you're doing it as well as another job. You're doing it probably because you love doing it and because it's keeping you going financially in some cases. And then you bring all your problems into the club on the pitch. How do you talk to someone without the manager looking at you going, he's not doing all right, I can't trust him on the pitch? I mean, that's a really big concern for someone to go, if I open up here, I'm showing weakness. Am I not going to get picked? Basically.
Yeah, it's bang on. All right. And that was the very reason I structured Yem to be the way it is. And it's independent. It's provided by the club, but independent. And that comes from, you've said it all already, right? If I'm a designated informal person in charge of player care, and what that could look in non-league is the person people know to go to with issues, or the people that more often than not are safeguarding, or there's someone within that setup, right?
Yeah.
If I had 1% doubt that what I said to you wasn't confidential, I'm not saying it. It's too much of a risk, right? And it's too hard. So what clubs that invest in young player care get is a totally safe and confidential space independent to the club. So take the New Saints, for example. They are the domestic champions in Wales. Okay. They invest in Yem, and then the players are provided the space by the New Saints, but I'm not held to account by the coaches or the managers. So they have no idea what's been said. The only things that I shared is if someone's access to support, so that we can evidence that it's being accessed, but the conversations and stuff is totally confidential. The way it works for the club is the performance element, right? It isn't strictly performance coaching, but you are freeing the asset that they have mentally, giving them the best opportunity to come to your club carefree, to whatever extent we can create that system. There's an example recently that we had where we had one player who said, he wanted to share more. He wanted to unload some of the personal issues he had. We spent first 4 weeks and we weren't talking about football. There was nothing to do. But eventually the assistant manager came and said he's been much better recently. He's been much clearer with how he approaches the game and is the way he's present at training and matches. And it was such a win, because it was a prime example of It wasn't the heavy aspect of when you're at your lowest, someone coming into you and saying, now I want to talk about psychology. Now I want to talk about performance. He became a better performer because we gave him space.
Yeah.
We gave him opportunity. And you knew, all right, this person is provided by the club, but he's not the manager. He's not the assistant manager. He's not someone that there's a risk. There's no risk of him sharing this. And when that happens, I think you get the most honest version of a footballer.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, so I've done a bit of business coaching where I'll go in there and I'll talk to corporates and top management, middle management. What tends to happen is that's as a result of the human resources team find out there's a problem that's gone through on a review to a manager who's then contacted the human resources and said, to sort this problem out for this person, I need a coach to come in and talk about that problem.
Yeah.
What that puts pressure on that individual to then discuss that problem and almost that problem only, even though every coaching session is completely confidential. It feels like they're going in there for the purpose of talking about what they were able to say. The reality is, and I imagine it's the same with you, what you find in the coaching session is completely different to what has actually been discussed with someone else, in the same way as you just said. So if the new Saints are providing you as a resource, people are coming to you, and because it's confidential, it could be anything. It literally could be anything that's being discussed. I mean, anything from concerns, health, family, worries, money, stress, all of those stresses. I mean, one of the big things is sexual preferences. I'm talking to Thomas Hitzelsberger about, how hard it was for him not to. So imagine that as a mental load of not being able to be yourself.
Yeah.
While you're actually playing is incredible. So when you're working with New Saints, how does that work? Do you have to be there in person? For the non-league club that's down in Kent or up north near David? I know you're not proper North David, but if you're outside of the Welsh remit and you want to have access to Tristan, how the hell do you do that? Do you drive over to Cardiff and just?
Yeah, well, it's so for the way it works is a predominantly online provision, and so if a club took an interest in providing this type of performance enhancing care, or whether it was just well-being support, you then instigate the conversation on what you want it to look like, and it can be tailored anyway. For example, next year I'll be working with a club in the very north of Wales, Colwyn Bay. Colwyn Bay wanted to be a club provision, so coaches can access the support and other people within the club because they're in high-performing environments, right?
Yeah.
And so you identify, like, what do you want to provide? I am very keen on establishing that the first time I present to the players and the first time I do it, has to be face-to-face, because I want them to see me physically in the flesh. I want to be able to share who I am with them, why I can help them, how it looks and what the process is. But from there onwards, then I'm an online provision catered by the club. But in the tailoring of the package, it could be, how do you want this to look? Do you want certain sessions? Do you want how many online sessions do you want it to be? How do you want them to connect with me? Do you want a gatekeeper at the football club who acts as the contact for me in the club? Do you want the clubs to have free reign? And I would then tell the club, just as I said earlier, just who's contacted them, and that's enough. It's very much a relationship between us. And sometimes I feel cheeky by saying I'm now your member of staff, but I think that's where it works best. If you were to invest in a type of provision where you had no control over it, it's very difficult for you to feel the benefits in the way you want. So Yem comes in and says, if you wanted to invest in player care, what would you want that to look like? And I respond then to how that looks. So it's online, but then you have an alternative tier. So you could say, but we want a monthly workshop. Well, that's just a different cost. It's not like a situation with the New Saints. I work with the academy as well. But what I do on that day is I arrive really early in the day, so I get to see the first team around lunchtime. I stay for the evening with the academy, and I get to physically see everybody. I like to go around. I don't ever mind traveling, but yeah, so it's accessible internationally, and certainly nationally. Just the first time we meet should be face to face, but beyond that, then it's at the discretion of the clubs and the players.
Listen, I mean, to be honest, I'm glad that you would explain how you were doing it, and we're not doing the podcast to say, right, everyone contact Tristan because we're selling Tristan's services. But the idea is, if you've got a club out there and they're not able to maybe contact you, or there's a for whatever reason, or they've got another provision that they're considering, the idea is for us, like for you, and I know when we've talked beforehand, it's doing the right thing for the non-league clubs and the non-league players, and not getting any provision to help with the mental health outside of the club and the staff isn't really a solution. And knowing that there is something like that in you and others like you, I think is extremely helpful for clubs. I think the lower down you get, I mean, by the time you get down into Sunday league and things like that, where you're really you're literally turning up, paying your fees for the day, and that's it. That's much more individual, because there's not going to be a team around you that can afford to have this service. It's not that level. When you've got a vets team, unless you're part of a much bigger environment, it's the same thing as again. We're talking here about teams that have got a certain amount of structure, but not the professional structure to have you in there on a full-time basis.
Yeah,
really, it's kind of where we're going at. And so you're doing, it's a fantastic effort that you're doing on that side. So out of interest, when you've got when you're looking at this approach, obviously you're coming from a mental health background and an experience background, but men like David, like myself. So do you offer the provision for the female aspect of the game as well, or how do you approach that one?
Yeah, so it's, as I said, it's not solely male provision. It's just that there's been far fewer conversations with female teams, and I genuinely get that. The first thing I'd like to do is, if I fast forward 5 years, and I'm very lucky enough to be in a position where I've had some success from this, the first thing I would do is employ a female, because I'd want to be able to provide the same space that I can provide a man. And contrary to what people think is right or wrong these days, men still agree with manly spaces, and women still agree with spaces for women. And we do cross so often and so well. But one of the reasons it works in the current situation with me and the first team players is that it's not clinical, and I understand football. Footballers like football. They like to know that when I share an issue with you, that your first reaction is, but you finish at 1 o'clock every day, or you're paid such and such £100 or £1,000 a week, and you want someone that understands actually that quickly becomes a norm, and that everybody's norm then faces issues. And so with the women's teams, I would absolutely love to have far more conversations with them and be able to showcase exactly what we do and how it works. Colwyn Bay next year are introducing it as a provision accessible for the women as a whole club, and I'm really excited for that challenge. The reason it hasn't happened so far, and I think is one of the elements, is that they probably look at me as more of a men's mental health provision, or it could be that the women's game hasn't had the same opportunity to excel as the men's, sorry. And that maybe someone, people just aren't ready for that point. Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, it's an element. I had to ask the question because we are within the non-league network. We're looking at how we can push not just the men's side of the game, but also the women's side of the game. And we're going to have some more guests onto the podcast in the next weeks to actually promote the women's game, because it does feel a little bit like, well, some of the investment is going towards the women's game, but actually some of the, there's still the interest is mainly on the men's game, and it just feels a little bit unbalanced at times. And so we are going to be addressing that. And it could be, the question that we might have for our guest then is, what kind of provision is there in the women's? So it's going to be an interesting.
And what type of provision do you want? I think a lot of the the conversations I totally agree with amongst the female game is they get the same maybe member of staff who started in the men's team who's added onto the women's team. They get the same provision that started in the men's team who's added onto the women's team. The women maybe don't get an opportunity to say, well, here are the gaps in our game. This is what we want it to look like. You know, it's difficult, isn't it? Because there's only so much investment there at the minute.
Yeah, they're playing catch up. Something we really want to do is be inclusive. Women, kids, youth, even disabled people. But yeah, they're just playing catch up, and they need a real lift, shall we say? No, I think it's great that you're doing it in non-league as well. So all my experience has been grassroots and non-league. And one thing I found when I left my scholarship, it was a non-league scholarship educational type course. But when I was 18 and I left that, I actually went to Sunday pub football. And I was only 18. I've never been a drinker or anything like that. I was always football. And then when I joined there, I was exposed to drink, drugs by people that were 30, 40 years old. And I was playing with these people. And obviously it's just the normal thing. So you get dragged into that. And that's one thing I massively regret, is not pursuing my football and getting to where I think now that I could have. Yeah. So through my 20s, playing through various non-league levels, there's still that talk of drugs and obviously drinking's heavily in non-league as well. Yeah. So I think being players that are released from academies and being obviously how I've done it, transitioning from boy to man and being exposed to that and it sort of being the normal thing to do. Yeah. I think that's an area which needs to be looked at as well within all the clubs across non-league.
100%. And the one thing that springs to mind with me, and I think I'm fairly unique in this viewpoint, but I wish I wasn't, is we tend to look at things that happen to people and put a name on them, right? So this happened to David, and then immediately in my calculation is, well, David is this type of character and he can cope with it. But we never look at it just like, this has happened to a human, right? This has happened to a set of organs, a mind, a heart, a soul. Yeah. And so how is this person who had such interaction on the football field up until this very point, he had teammates, he had structure, he had a routine, he had a belief system, he had a future laid out. All of a sudden, this human doesn't have that anymore. The question we should be asking is, why would they not be turning to alcohol and drugs? It's a horrible situation. If I took someone from very, it's not the same context exactly, but if I told them that their job was only a year on, year off, and that you had to fight for the contract to be extended, and that once they'd become a certain point where we just go, no more, sorry. How would that person deal with that? Yeah. They'd be clinically depressed. They'd be anxious. They'd be nervous. They'd want to look for something to make them feel good, whether it was drugs or alcohol. And then we'd be challenging their ego. We'd be saying, oh, you're not a strong enough character because you can't come through it. It's just a human response, isn't it? And we should look at that type of situation like you've just named there and say, stop putting a name to this. How is a human supposed to cope with this? What are we putting in place to catch them at that point?
There's a lot. For me, that's something that we really have good conversations about, because we have people who work at the academy system and who've had a podcast with us, actually on the team as well, Non-League Network, of looking at the transition from academy to, are you going to make it? Or are you going to convert back to something else? Are you going to work into something else and still try and make it maybe later on and go down to non-league levels? And then what is a real interest to me as well is when you are a player and you've got to whatever level physically and also with your temporary, your opportunities, but also your physical attributes and also your mental attributes have got you to this level. Mm-hmm. What happens at the end of that, and you go back into what I call it is civvy world. So like a police officer, when they've done their career and they've done their period of time, 20, 25 years or whatever it is, you'll be extremely lucky in football. If you go past 35, 36, 37, that's a massively long career. We're going to be talking to Jamie Cureton coming up in the next, he's had a much longer career, but the norm is really, you're lucky if you made it to mid-30s. And then you've got to find yourself, suddenly you're like, shit, what do I do now? Because I spoke to a couple of players who were at the professional level, and they said, yeah, to be honest, the clubs just went, see ya, bye bye. You thanks for what you did. Not even that, actually. One of them just said, yeah, a new manager came in, or a new person came in, and they were in their mid-30s and a contract, and they kind of went, you're done.
Yeah.
I don't know how I would feel like that if I was in my job, and then suddenly a new boss comes in and then just goes, do you know what? You're not going to work with your senior management or your top level manager. You're now going to go and sit with the juniors. You're now going to go and sit with the 18-year-olds who are doing their apprenticeship. And, you're mid-30s going, this isn't right. So, like, how do you approach that in terms of a mindset? And if you've got a player going, mate, I'm losing it, I'm starting to get to the end of my career, and I don't think my manager trusts in me anymore. What's the kind of approach you've got?
The approach I tend to take is ensuring that people have coping strategies and skill sets, because I personally, as much as I would fight for all clubs seeing their players from a human perspective, like a person before a footballer, I also don't think it's ever going to change. They are assets. Footballers are assets, and I think there's a case that could be made the opposite direction, which should make it completely irrelevant and say these are our assets, that we're paying them every week. This is what we expect in return. But when people are approaching transitions, say from academy to first team to maybe a lower league, or lower league not playing at all, it's ensuring that with the time we had, did we build a set of skills that we could cope with it? Because you really are dropped in the deep end, like you, David, what you were talking about, your story, if you weren't given the opportunity to acquire skill sets. And it's the very reason I have a tagline for Yem, which is called theory light, practical heavy. And it's my belief that men, if I give you an example, I go to the doctor, all right, and I go to the doctor and I tell the doctor, this has been happening. When he's talking to me then about the options I have, the reasons I have, I'm feeling where I'm feeling, the types of medication I can have, all this, I'm switched off. I'm waiting for him to tell me how much I should take and when, right? Yeah. Because that's what I came for. And so I leave and I go home. My wife goes, what did the doctor say? So take these, this man. Did you say anything else? Don't know. Because I'm like, that's what I came for. That's the next job. I move on. And so theory I have is players don't want to know the background of strategies. They don't want to know whether this is taken from the world of sports psychology, taken from the world of mindfulness, they just want to know, here's how I feel. Yeah. How do I tackle that? And so we implement strategies like a really good example is a 22-year-old. I asked him, give me a totally honest answer now, totally honest. How much time are you going to put into like self-reflection or opportunities? Like, if I'm being totally honest, I don't even know when I do it. I want to do it, but I don't know when. So it's okay. Do you have a stretching routine? Yeah. Do you stretch? How often? Every day. It's okay. For how long? For about 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Okay, great. So what I did was create a bank of questions, about 10 to 15 questions. I said, when you stretch from now on, don't put the telly on, put some meditation music on, and spend 1 minute on each question. And the questions were things like, where did my energy go last week? Where would I want more of my energy to go next week? Who did I give too much attention to this week? How can I be a better version as a footballer into the next week? Just questions that you didn't need more than a minute to consider them, but it was within his routine. So he didn't have to spend additional time, and he was stretching at the same time. And so that skill set means that, okay, if he finds himself in a really difficult and tricky situation in the future, at least he can look at the process of maybe self-reflection, which is the skill we're trying to work on, and be like, okay, so I can see something coming my way. This is bad news. What do I need to do? And implement these strategies. There's obviously there's thousands of different ways, but I think for me, it's about ensuring coping strategies are in place. We can't, you, Patrick, you've experienced it yourself. You can't stop people from going through difficult times.
Yeah.
and it's coming, especially as footballers. You said yourself, if you're a 36-year-old footballer and you're still being paid for your job, that's such a success story in itself. But it's coming.
Yeah.
And so the only thing we can do is provide coping strategies for the transition when it arrives.
That's
I like
brilliant.
that. Habit stacking.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why when Dave and Jason talked about the non-league network, one of the things that struck me is at the non-league level, that sort of thinking and that sort of logical strategy and element, mate, you're not going to get that because your club's too busy surviving week by week. And the people at the club, the 2 or 3 people who are there who are working full time and all the other volunteers, they're making sure the club is like there's enough bloody electricity go. You know, someone's been putting the money in in there, that there's gonna be match day fixtures, that you know they've got the referee booked in, they've got the catering sorted out, there's enough burgers. They're not able on their own necessarily, and that's definitely no reflection on the clubs, because I absolutely love non-league clubs. And you know, you go into that non-league club and you're thinking you haven't actually got that reflection of what can we put in place for the mental health of our players and our staff and everything like that. But actually what we did with this, and Dave's idea in the first place and Jason and myself coming in, is going with non-league network, we can make people like you, Tristan, who like, because there's millions of people who play football in the UK, but actually for them to have access to listening to you on a podcast. So I'm doing my exercise. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm doing my fitness. I know I'm going to go and do training later on. I might be on a building site for most of the day. But while I'm doing my workout in the morning, and I really, you know, I've got maybe half an hour. Right. Do you know what? I can listen to Tristan because I know there was that podcast on Non-League Network, and he might be able to give me a few pointers. And you've done loads there already, and I really appreciate it because it's quite nice to know how you can approach that mindset. And the thing is that once you open that up, like people will have loads of questions. So, of course, people can find you on the Non-League Network, right? That's cool. Of course, there's going to be the podcast. I think there might be some logic as to doing another one with you in the future as well, to see kind of how you're developing. I know you're going to go into various different events. You've been invited to various things because you're becoming a bit of a name in terms of men's mental health within the football game as well at non-league level. But is there anything before we go that you can sort of give as a quick piece of advice to a non-league player? You know, we're talking about 80% of the players, the ones who are doing it for fun and still have some sort of aspirations, but literally we're turning up because we're good enough to be able to play, but we're not injured enough to give up yet. And we've got all our shit that goes on in our daily lives, but actually we're on the pitch. And how do we make sure that that moment on the pitch for us is we can make the most of it? Just have you got some sort of quick tips, really, just for that average player, just anything they can do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think you give me an idea there. We could do another one of these, and we could do simply on practical strategies. So if you had, if we could spend the fortnight before we meet online, and we could ask players what type of issues we have, and then we could have a session strictly on practical strategies. But faced with the question you presented, and I know I've touched upon it, but so often high performers don't need help in being high performers. They need help in accessing high performance. And they're two completely different things. So, for example, if I'm working with a footballer who's being paid to play for whatever level that is, and they know and understand the game in a more in-depth way than I do, right? I can't tell them how to be a better footballer. I can help them access themselves, right? Because they've been in great form. They've had opportunities that enable them to be who they currently are. And the one thing I would say, the key to all of that is self-reflection. We, as men in particular, we wing it, okay? Go week by week, and we look continuously forward. We never stop and go, where am I right now? And that could be a really simple process. It could be looking at a match. And I know we don't like to spend hours reflecting on things that have happened, but it could just be simple as what went well and what could I improve? Really simple process. But you're actually looking at patterns, right? So if someone enters a period of poor form, they didn't arrive 1 week in okay form, and the next week that was it. I was in really poor form. There was patterns along the way of maybe small changes they implemented, small things they weren't doing consistently, a routine they put in place. So I would think, I know it's a general vague response, but opportunities to sit, be present with what you want to achieve, and think about the reflection. I honestly know it sounds vague, but it's something we just don't do. Right? I haven't done it this week. I haven't done it over the last month or so, and I know I need to. And I could tell you right now, my self-defense would be, I'm really busy. I've got stuff coming on the horizon. I need to get prepped for this. It's all about what's to come. But I have no idea about how I performed over the last month. I can't tell you what went well. Like, we talked about Kensington Palace. I can't tell you what I got from that. I can't tell you who I spoke to, because immediately I'm thinking about the next thing. Same for footballers. You have 90 minutes that you could reflect on. Did you? No. How do we know what to spot?
Yeah, that's a bit like where I am with. My pretty much as soon as I finished football, all my background is in construction. So I was brickies labourer, ground worker, engineer, and all of that was basically it was just a job I didn't enjoy, and I was just dwelling and just earning money, going out, getting drunk, whatever. And it's not until I've actually started this, which is a passion project. It's very, very stressful. It's up and down like a roller coaster. And yeah, you don't just sit and enjoy it or reflect on it. And I'm just thinking, like you said, it's forward. What have I got on today? What have I got on next week? And it's sort of a worry to me as well. But one thing I have been doing, because I've got an accountability coach who touches on business stuff with me, and he's a bit like a therapist as well, to be honest. He's amazing. But one thing he's mentioned to me is journaling, reflecting in that way, and like being grateful. So that's one thing. Is my key word this year is gratefulness, because I don't enjoy the process that I'm in. I'm just worrying, stressed all the time and thinking forward. We need to get here. But it's not until the start of this year where I've actually, written down what I'm grateful for. And I've actually got a great life, young lad. We're just nearly 2 now. And I write down all this stuff, and it's actually becoming an enjoyable process. And I've said to Pat and Jason earlier, like, this year seems to have turned for the non-league network, and the last 2 weeks have just been amazing. So yeah.
But you and me both with that. You and me both are exactly the same. This is the power of having someone hold up a mirror in front of you, right? When you talked about gratitude then, kid you not, it's the exact same goal I have this year. I could easily tell you, I'm not where I want to be. It's not enough. I haven't done enough. A year ago, if you'd have told me that I was attending any football conference, one football conference, I'd have bitten your hand off. But it isn't enough. And so you have to be able to hold this mirror up and say, what does a previous version of me think of where I am right now? And I know he'd love where I am. But that's the self-reflection bit. That's the bit where I could easily plow on now and tell you and just go, it's not enough, not enough, not enough. Achieve what I wanted to achieve and turn back and go, actually,
mate, that's such a hard thing to do, because the thing is, I can do this with my mates. So I've got to go do exactly the same thing. A mate of mine, and he was going, I'll be happy when. And actually, I had to say to him, stop, because you've done this and this and this and this and this, and all of those bits you should be happy about. So don't give me the shit of I'll be happy when, because you should be happy with that stage and that stage and that stage. And that's the problem, is you're always chasing. You're always chasing the dream, and if you get to that dream, you're going to be like, actually, I want more, and that's okay, because in some ways it might give you more ambition. But actually, if you're always chasing the dream, you're not going to be enough. And if it's not enough, and we know as men, that's when you start going, if it's not enough, am I enough? And if I'm not enough, what's the point in going on? And then you spiral the other way very, 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 very quickly. And I mean, that's the big concern. And that's where, as you said, I'm going to probably be closing up now on this, but as you said right at the start, men don't talk like that. And when we're going, I'll be happy when, and you don't actually look at what you've achieved, you're not talking to your other half. You're not talking to your kids. You're not talking to anyone really. You might, I mean, there's, you know, you might have chats with blokes, but it won't be, do you know what, mate? I'm never going to be happy until I'm actually happy in myself. You don't hear that. That's not bloke talk, but it's kind of understanding what you've achieved and where you are in your life, so that you'll never feel like you're not enough. And to me, that's been something that I struggle with. I mean, you mentioned it, but I definitely had that when I've just gone, I've let everyone down. I'm not enough. I'm not bringing enough money in. I'm not, you know, I'm not achieving what I should achieve. I should have been this footballer. I should have done that job. I should have done that here. You know, we can't afford to go on that holiday because I didn't earn enough. Whatever, you know, and eventually you're going, well, yeah, but hang on, I've achieved all of this other stuff, but it's almost like that doesn't exist. So thank you for saying that. I think journaling and also reflection, self-reflection, really useful. I think an idea for the next conversation between us. It's your chance now to kind of, you know, you've given us 45 minutes of your time. We're going to cut some of it up, obviously, for different media, but it's your chance to actually say, once again, who you are, how people can get hold of you, because yes, they can find you on our website, because that's, you know, where you find everything. Anything that's non-legal, you can find Non-League Network. And if it's not there yet, it will be. But what if they actually want to talk to you? How do they get hold of you? How do they look at, and by the way, if they want to hold a lookalike contest and David wants to join in, how do they do that? You know?
So, well, you could contact me through Non-League Network or yourselves. I am massive in using LinkedIn, and I abandoned all other social media effectively. There's an Instagram which has the drips of what I don't post on LinkedIn. Only because I feel that the football community and that world fits really well within LinkedIn. I think it's a good way to portray who you are effectively and accurately. But www.yemindset.com. It's in construction, so forgive the sections that are maybe like you know, your bog standard paragraph that's ready to be edited. And yeah, I think just reach out and to be honest, I'm not the best salesman. It's not something that I always like to do. And I know that I need to make a business successful, but talk openly about this. And I arrive at clubs and have conversations and I feel I need to tell them straight away, like, really poor. Can we just have a chat? Like, I don't like the element of that. But what I would say about non-league and what YEM can provide is, you hit the nail on the head when you talked about the amount of staff that they have and they don't have and they would like to have. My question for non-league is, how do you then get the best performance from the players within your system? And my solution is emotional availability. Okay, you can't invest in a club's sports psychologist. You can't invest in a sports scientist and a sports therapist. How do you ensure that these players that play for your shirt are as close to the best they can be on a weekly basis? And you've got to allow that person to offload the concerns and troubles they have so that they can arrive in football the best version of themselves. And that's my, I would say, quote unquote, sell on the matter.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you, Tristan.
Yeah.
So any final words from you, David, or?
No, I think it's great. I think one thing that popped to mind during the conversation was about I think Brighton done a advert not long ago, and I thought that was quality. So if anyone hasn't seen that, go and check it out.
Yeah, and Norwich.
Yeah, that one.
Norwich.
It is, yeah. It is. I mean, it is starting to come across the right way, but it's there's a long way to go on all those kind of things. Listen, thank you very much. It's been another podcast by the Non-League Network, starting to have quite a few here, and hopefully we're building a bit of like a bank of knowledge for people who can listen to us at any time, whether they're doing it while they're training, if they're doing it while they're driving, when they're doing it when they, they're at home relaxing. It's just quite useful to have this for the non-league players and non-league clubs, because there wasn't really anything like it beforehand. So appreciate this, Tristan. David, thank you very much, and we'll catch up with you at another point.
Yeah, cheers.